2 in the NFL was absolutely wild, with miraculous comeback wins across the league. So what does Week 3 have in store? Could it be the last time Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers square off? It's a matchup that's been dominated by TB12, winning 3 out of 4, including the postseason. And while it's still a possibility they could meet up in the playoffs once again, both are still aiming to get their offenses to a higher gear.
This is going to be a really good football team in Tampa, and obviously they're going to be expecting to be playing in January.
In the AFC, the Bengals, Titans, and Raiders all find themselves in an 0-2 hole after disappointing performances in Week 2. And with the Silver and Black heading to Nashville, the loser of that matchup will face an arduous road to get back to the postseason.
In this league, nobody's going to feel sorry for you. We understand that. We don't expect that. We don't want anybody to. We have to get things fixed. We have to figure out how to win a game.
Does anyone want to win the AFC South? A combined 1 win in 8 games total leaves the Jacksonville Jaguars alone in first place, heading into SoFi to take on the Chargers.
The group we got, and we're confident we can beat anybody we play.
But there are teams playing good football in the AFC that will match up in Week 3, with the Bills heading to Miami to face the Dolphins. Tua Tagovailoa certainly silenced plenty of doubters with his epic 6-touchdown performance in a comeback win in Baltimore, but taking down the Bills, who are the clear favorites to win it all, is going to take a much greater team effort.
When we execute how we know we're supposed to execute, leads to success typically, and we're just trying to be the best versions of ourselves.
All eyes will be on the quarterbacks in the Rocky Mountains, with Jimmy G back at the helm for the 49ers and Russell Wilson and the Broncos struggling to put points on the board.
We're just going to keep getting better and better. I mean, this is a journey that's together, and I'm excited for it.
It might be early in the season, but the stakes are slowly increasing. And if Week 3 is anything like Week 2, we're in for another wild ride.
We are getting you ready for Week 3 in the NFL. So we got Bills at Dolphins on CBS Sunday afternoon. Let's welcome in our NFL insider, Josina Anderson. Josina, you are going to be there. You're coming down our way. We're in Fort Lauderdale, just north of Miami. You're going to be covering the game. I got to tell you, though, prices for this. I tried to look as a commoner, Josina. They have gone way up there. You got the Bills defense. Are we all good? We're good. She's checking on. Yes, this is why she's our insider.
Well, I was getting a text right there. Someone was confirming that it was a quad tear, but that was like the second text already got. And we'll get to that later. Speaking of the injury to Browns linebacker Anthony Walker, who obviously went down in that game Thursday night against the Steelers, but we'll get to his quad tear and the significance of that on the defense.
Okay, so let's talk about the Bills-Dolphins game because you are going to be at that one. Bills defense pulling up short in this one. Both of their safeties, their starting safeties in Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, they're going to be out for this game. What do we need to know about those injuries and more heading into this one?
So, yeah, very interesting because before practice started, head coach Sean McDermott always does his interview on the local radio station there. And he announced that safety Micah Hyde would be out along with defensive tackle Jordan Phillips and cornerback Dane Jackson, who we already figured would be the case when we watched him get put on a stretcher in that game and go to the hospital after suffering that neck injury. What's really impactful to the Bills defense is, one, when you consider this. First of all, Micah Hyde dealing with a neck injury that kind of went under the radar after everyone was focused on Dane Jackson. But right now, they're not necessarily wanting to comment on whether that is long-term, but he is getting a second opinion on that. And that's not necessarily a good step when you're trying to figure out in terms of having optimism and hope towards, his presence for the rest of the season. So it's definitely something to keep your eye on. Now, defensive tackle Jordan Phillips is dealing with a hamstring injury that didn't allow him to practice all week, so he is out. That's another thing. And then, like I mentioned, you're already dealing with cornerback Dane Jackson, who, by the way, is already in for a Tre'Davious White, who is still trying to recover from that ACL injury that right now has him on short-term IR. But a couple things right now that makes that interesting, because Dane Jackson coming in for Tre'Davious White, and even at the time that he came in for him last year that he was dealing with that injury, they were already ranked second against the pass. They finished first against the pass with Dane Jackson in there for White, right? And then now this year, you start off with Dane Jackson. I was at that game at the beginning of the season, Thursday Night Football. They are flopping two rookies on the either side in Christian Benford and Kyer Elam. And so now the impact of having Dane Jackson out, and this is what I was hearing earlier in the week, is that most likely they're going to be starting two rookies in the secondary for the first time this season. And perhaps, and we'll look this up before I do this game on Sunday, for the first time since Leslie Frazier has been defensive coordinator. Now, other thing that's very interesting with that, when you go back to that Thursday night football game with Dane Jackson, Christian Benford is the one who got the start. He is the cornerback that was the 6th rounder of the rookies of the two out of Villanova. Kyer Elam is the 1st rounder for them out of Florida. So Benford was the one that was getting the start over him. Now it's likely that the two of them will be starting in the secondary. So a very interesting adjustment. But when you go back to that game against the Rams, the rookies were holding their own. They were able to get 3 interceptions off Matthew Stafford. They didn't have any major errors that stood out in that game relative to pinning it on the rookies, though this likely would be the first time that they're starting together as that combo. So definitely something to look onto, particularly when you're dealing with the hot Dolphins team.
Yeah, that hot offense, Tua, we saw what he did last week. And let's stay on the injury front here. Let's talk about Justin Herbert, limited in practice. He's still dealing with that rib injury. Now, he's saying he feels more comfortable. Not sure what we should read into there as the Chargers host the Jags on Sunday.
Well, you're right. He suffered that rib injury last Thursday. So now he's been dealing with that 8 days. So he's about 8 days removed from that rib injury right there. I talked to a source this morning, and let's get right to what they said. As far as going into practice, they considered it 50-50 at that time, dealing with a lot of pain, specifically when you're trying to twist in the core. Now, a lot of people just say, go ahead and put on a flak jacket to absorb the contact. That should be enough. But what people don't realize is that there are muscles underneath that rib injury. So when you're twisting, even to hand off, that can be painful. When you're coughing, when you're sneezing, when you're laughing, that can be painful as well. But this is the reason why they have to determine if he's going to get what's called an intercostal nerve block. That's the pain injection that goes into the nerve, so you're not feeling it. The source that I talked to this morning didn't know if they were going to, that being Justin Herbert, take the shot or not. One of the things that they said they could potentially do is take the shot or not, but also adjust the game plan relative to how much he's passing versus maybe handing off as he did in practice as well. Now let's look back at the last 2 games, because in the first week, he had 34 pass attempts for 279 yards, 48 pass attempts for 339 against KC. Will that come down to the 20s? If he's able to play as far as handing that off more to the running backs, we'll see. Another thing for you fantasy owners to keep in mind is that Alvin Kamara dealing with a very similar injury that did have him out the last week, and now he's been limited in practice this week. So will he do it? Will he not do it? But when you're looking at Justin Herbert and what he was able to do in the game after suffering that injury, he sat out the play right after it, came back in, threw a ball that went into the turf, and then right after that had a 35-yard dart of a completion, dime of a completion over the middle to DeAndre Carter, which really shows his toughness, which is why a source said to me, if it's up to Justin Herbert, he's going to want to play. But another consideration is obviously the doctor whose care he is under. The team doctor is the same doctor that Tyrod Taylor is currently suing for $5 million after he suffered a punctured lung in 2020. And so even when Brandon Staley was asked, is there any trepidation relative to getting the shot, or Justin Herbert, QB1, being under the same team doctor's care, what they said is that Justin Herbert's care is definitely of our utmost concern. And what we're trying to do is make sure that everyone is in alignment relative to obviously Justin Herbert, his family, the agents, and the doctors to the whole process of treating this injury right now.
Josina, as we're moving through the weekend here and some injuries, let's talk about the Cardinals in a couple different facets here. So big comeback win against the Raiders. Another big game for them on Sunday. They're hosting the Rams. Talk to me about James Conner. What's the update with him and his status for Sunday? And also, I know Cliff Kingsbury has been talking to this team about not starting off so slow. What's the plan when it comes to that as well?
So you're right. I mean, on the good news is that the Cardinals came off of a big win in overtime, 29-23, over the Raiders. But during that game, James Conner suffered an ankle injury in the third quarter and did not return. Now, on Wednesday, James Conner did not practice. On Thursday, he was limited. And a source told me this morning, as of this morning, that was going into practice, that he was scheduled to play on Sunday. So as you know, sometimes when players go into practice on a various day, it can turn up or turn down, but that is the current expectation. And the very interesting thing too, when you're looking at the Cardinals rushing game, is that none of their runners in the first two games are rushing over 40 yards, but collectively, they're still averaging 123 rush yards per game, which currently ranks 11th. And when you talk about what you just brought up in tossing to me, the slow starts for the Cardinals, right now they have 7 points total in the first half over the first two games. Only the Colts and the Giants have scored fewer than that in that same period over the first 2 weeks. So one of the things that a source said to me is that they may consider running the ball a little bit more relative to trying to control the clock and also get that going, since it has been effective for them in moving the chains, not quite to the pace that we saw the Browns do last night in the way that they just absolutely dominated the time of possession against the Steelers, but just a little bit more to see if that's a tweak that can help them just score points and settle down the offense so that they're coming away with conversions in the red zone.
We don't have to see Kyler Murray put the entire team on his back later in the game, a little bit earlier. Let's talk about the Giants here, because we don't always have it. We have happy Giants fans right now, and they're looking forward to the return, or the debut, I should say, of Kayvon Thibodeau, gearing up for his NFL debut. He hurt his MCL back in preseason. I know they're keeping it somewhat close to the vest, but what are you hearing about when he can make that debut?
All right, so I'll tell you what I'm hearing. But, you know, we got to remember, it's what I'm hearing right now. So this morning, when I asked the source about Kayvon Thibodeau, they pretty much were calling him good to go for the game. They thought it was a high probability that he would play, but they stopped short of making that official because they said you always got to see up to that last minute. So I would say that it sounds hopeful right now. As you mentioned, he suffered that knee injury in the second preseason game against the Bengals after that controversial cut block that he was on the receiving end for. They've been very cautious in terms of making sure that he's okay, obviously missing the first two games. So we'll see if he is definitively able to make his debut. But Kayvon Thibodeau has been going through a couple of nicks when it comes to the injury bug. Remember, he also dealt with the hip injury in OTAs that kind of kept him sidelined on sideline drills and things like that. So they are hopeful that they can get their first round pick, because obviously they also had Evan Neal as well, participate in this very interesting 2-0 start right now that they have after impressive wins against the Titans, even more so impressive maybe though than the Panthers, but nonetheless the Giants making some noise in the NFC East right now.
Yeah, and hosting the Cowboys on Monday night, that is going to be absolutely huge for them. Okay, finally, let's finish up with the Browns. We saw them beat the Steelers in Thursday Night Football. They had this players-only meeting earlier in the week. It appears to have paid off. Tell us about how this Browns team is kind of rebounding from the first couple games of the season into now. And then I know you also had an injury update as well.
Well, yeah, very interesting, because week 2 was just very topsy-turvy. There were a lot of collapses that happened that should not have happened. And I felt like when I was talking to coaches after those games, because a lot of times you talk to them late night after the games, really early in the morning before they go into the facility, that's a prime time to catch them. And there was just a lot of somberness. There was a lot of, cathartic emotions relative to those collapses. Some of those coaches going straight back to the facility to start working on the next game, giving themselves like 2 or 3 hours before they have to return to the facility. So I'm just trying to give you an idea sometimes of how these things weigh on the teams and the coaches, specifically in the Browns situation where they were up, 31-17 with 1:55 left. And then they obviously lost to the Jets. And you mentioned that players only meeting with the defensive players, really needing to feel like they had to kind of air things out. There was a lot of finger pointing kind of going on behind the scenes that just needed to be smoothed out. When I talked to a source this morning, they said they were completely okay with that. Sometimes that's what players have to do to get on the same page. And it ended up working out. And one of the things that I wanted to point it out that I heard this morning were sort of key changes that they made against the Steelers in that game. One, particularly on the defensive side, what they did is they changed a lot of those calls to single calls and had no check. So the original call coming in from the sideline is what they stuck with. What I was hearing behind the reasoning behind that was just to simplify things, make it easier on the guys, and just keep them confident relative to what the information that they're going in with and what they're kind of told with to react in front of them. And then the other thing that they noticed, particularly after the Jets game, is that one of the reasons why they said that that collapse happened is because the Jets, according to them, got very desperate and started to do what they call the double chip protection on both ends. I'm told that normally they see that in the game about 3 to 4 times, and that collapse against the Jets, they saw it about 20 times. And the interesting thing that they said in the game last night is that they feel that the Pittsburgh Steelers tried to copy that and that they were prepared for it because they know what was effective against them in those last few minutes. But they thought it was interesting that the Steelers tried to go with that as well. And obviously they don't feel like that was effective.
Josina, it's good we don't have BMAC on today because he was heated going into this game yesterday. Not
BMAC
a happy
heated
camper
and talking
today.
and running his mouth, no surprise.
Exactly. We're all going to have to get on air together soon. We'll set that up. Josina, you are always a wealth of information. We appreciate it. Safe travels down to Miami, and we will catch you on Sunday for that game. It's going to be a great one. Bills at Dolphins. The Bills favored by 5.5 on the road, but of course their 2 starting safeties are out, as you heard there from JoJo, against this Dolphins offense we saw last weekend.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.